So the webinar topic today is all about addressing the critical topics and key challenges that the waste and resource sector are facing in 2025, and then crucially, what are the solutions to overcome them. So today we're joined by three different panelists that all have a direct impact into these solutions, all with a wide-ranging expertise and in different areas. Myself, I'm Matthew Stevenson. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Greyparrot. My job role is all around utilising of AI to drive both efficiencies within the systems themselves, but also informing different policy decisions and different types of innovations across the sector, whether that's integrating in with equipment or finding different types of efficiencies within the process themselves. So firstly, I guess I'll pass to the panelists so you can all introduce yourselves and we understand who we're listening to. So first off, I'll pass to Jonathan Caesar.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm Jonathan Caesar. I work for SUEZ as a senior technical plant engineer. So I lead a team of engineers in SUEZ's technical team to design, monitor, optimize, and continually improve mechanical treatment processes in order to realise maximum value from material feedstocks. Part of my role includes developing strategy in relation to mechanical treatment technologies and ensuring SUEZ stay at the cutting edge of new developments. Thank you, Matt.
Great, Jonathan. It's really nice to have you. I'll pass across to Jody now.
Hi, I'm Jody Sheraton, the Operations Director for Cheshire West Recycling. We're a council-owned LATCO operating out of Cheshire. So I'm responsible for all the operational delivery of the service. So we run just over 170,000 households. So I operate, we've got a small MRF, so we do twin stream collections. We've got a small MRF that sorts a container line out, and we've got Greyparrot technology on there. So we're very much a data-driven business. We've taken a lot of efficiency via a data-driven approach. So we see ourselves pretty much quite at the forefront of that side of things, using data in terms of Power BI to help us shape decisions. So we take a slightly different approach to how we deliver things, which is all based on more of a logistical type approach, and we're starting to put that logic into the work we do with the MRF. So we've done a lot of work with Greyparrot in terms of how we can optimize line performance and even get it down to a granular level where we can engage with communities around trying to improve material quality and stuff. So that all that side of the stuff sits with myself.
Great, Jody. Thank you very much for the introduction. And then passing across to Jonathan Atwood.
Hi, so I'm Jonathan Atwood. I'm Head of Technical and Quality here at IPL Brightgreen. IPL Brightgreen are recyclers of polypropylene and HDPE. On site we have 1 sorting plant, 3 washing plants and 7 extrusion plants. So our site's a little bit different to the other panellists, but there's still some overlap in between when it comes to things like the sorting.
Fantastic. Yeah, great bunch of panelists, all with their own unique background and tackling the difficulties within the sector in different ways and with different approaches. So it should be a really interesting discussion. So right, let's jump into some questions there in the meat of the topic. So what do you see as the biggest challenges for MFs and recyclers, and what do you see as the expected difficulty, in your opinion, in 2025? I think we'll go to Jonathan Caesar as a starting point.
So I took this and yeah, I've got a few responses of my own. But in addition to that, I thought, with it being fairly relevant to what it is we're discussing today, why not shove it into Google and see what the AI overview spits out? So I took the question apart a little bit, but the AI overview, it's not given a terrible answer, if I'm honest. It says material recovery facilities face several key challenges, including high levels of contamination from non-recyclable materials, inconsistent waste streams due to changing consumer habits, complex sorting of mixed materials, fluctuating market demands for recycled goods, maintenance of complex machinery, worker safety concerns, and the need for continuous adaptation to evolving packaging designs. all of which can significantly impact the efficiency and profitability of recycling operations. So I think it'd be a bit of a cop-out if I just gave you that, to be honest. So in addition to that, I've got some of my own thoughts on the matter. But just because it's fairly pertinent to what we're discussing today, I thought an AI overview may be complementary to my answer as well. So my own musings on this, I guess one of the biggest things for me within the next year or couple of years really is changing waste composition, to a large extent driven by collection and packaging reforms. So, I mean, just some of the changes we could be looking at as a result of extended producer responsibility include changing how producers decide to package goods. That could result in some reformatting to try and reduce their EPR liability, which then obviously has a knock-on effect when we come to recycling it once it's been used as a product. Simpler recycling is going to change the types of material targeted within recycling collections. So again, that's going to result in a knock-on effect to the change of composition when it comes to a material recovery facility. And it's not upon us yet, but DRS, again, has the potential to change compositions quite significantly, taking out a lot of aluminium and PET from those recyclates, and could also result in some reformatting as well by producers to avoid the deposit as a result of the DRS rollout. So I guess that covers a little bit on changing composition. The next point on my list is a lack of investment due to policy uncertainty. So, I mean, we've had a recent report from RAP identifying strong investment potential within the sector as a result of policy change and that sort of thing, which I think is broadly agreed with, but as well as there being strong potential, there's also still barriers to investment as well that a lot of people are concerned with. So we need to overcome those barriers so that people can begin making investments in infrastructure and make sure that we're going to be certain on the outcomes of those investments. Labour costs, it's one that could somewhat be addressed, I guess, really by investing more in infrastructure. We can potentially reduce labour costs by increasing more automation and reducing the amount of manual picking required. But it's reliant on that piece before about the investment. We need to make sure we're investing in the right areas to mitigate that labour cost and make sure that we don't end up making investments in the wrong places. Back-end markets, so quality and quality requirements, to make sure that the materials that are produced from these facilities have the value associated with them, and maybe plastic packaging tax, for example, for plastics is able to help with that and drive more appetite for the back-end products from these facilities. I guess moving more onto a process focused and away from policy a bit, and more relevant to AI analytics to an extent as well, is knowing what the process is doing and being able to monitor the process in an effective way. At the moment, a lot of facilities are reliant on manual sampling and those sort of processes to try and determine how the process is performing. And for me, from a process engineer perspective, you want to know what the process is doing all the time, not just whenever you've collected that sample. And the final challenge really that I've got, and I've put a few exclamation marks after it in my notes, is fires. So again, one that's key for the industry, and we have a fair number of fires and facilities destroyed as an industry, and it's something that really we need to be able to try and control, although it's not very often within our control, because those fires are caused by things that arrive in the material that's given to us. And that's it from me on that one, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for a very complete answer. There's a couple of bits that I just wanted to pick back up with you there. You mentioned that fires you see as being, a big problem facing. It's not just this year, but in previous years also, and also investment. Do you see those two things as being linked?
Oh, yeah, potentially, or almost certainly. I guess when you're looking at those large scale investments, you need to mitigate fire risk to ensure that an asset isn't destroyed or doesn't come to damage. I remember talking to somebody a couple of years ago about the risk of the industry becoming uninsurable as a result of the fires that we're having, which is obviously not a good place to be in. So yeah, absolutely. But for me, the point around investment is more one of policy uncertainty than it is one around fires. Both play a crucial part in that, but I would say it's more around the policy and making sure that we know what the policy is going to do and what direction we're heading in.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Yeah, certainly these are definite difficulties that we're facing this year. I guess to move on, I think what I'd really like to ask is around how can we start preparing for some of these challenges today. I mean, Jody, I know a lot of these things are stuff that you're covering on site. Have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think so. As obviously Jonathan covered quite a lot of it, but from an operational point of view, I think the big ones for me are around that whole supply quality issue is a real one. Obviously, you can only get through the supply quality. You're limited in what your controls are of that, particularly in terms of the feedstock. If you're running, like say, we run twin bin systems, and in reality, the container mix you get in, the ability to control that at a doorstep level is quite difficult, because ultimately it's at the bottom of the bin, stuff is hidden within there. It seems to be an area whereby councils are quite nervous in terms of engaging with residents strongly in order to make them use the right materials, put the right materials in the right places. But I think there is definitely an area, particularly to work on. You end up with a massive pile of mixed material and you've got no idea where it's come from. It feels like you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, and that's something that we've tried to pull apart in Cheshire West Recycling to try and stop looking for needles in haystack and use data to find the needles properly. Something we've focused on quite heavily. So in terms of those and the use of AI and Greyparrot is to actually turn it from a massive pile of paper, which is just on a pile of mixed containers, to go, I know this came from this round, I know this came from this area, and I know the contamination is in with this percentage, because we can use the AI technology to do that. I think that's a big thing for us to work on, and then starting to be a bit cleverer about isolating rounds. And then I think the next one comes to, for us, it's around productivity. And it's interesting what we're saying about, it's not just, I don't think it's always about more investment. I think it's easy to say, oh no, we could invest in robotics or something else. But in reality, it's about getting more out of what you've got. So for me, one of the big areas is focusing on maximizing productivity of the line. So at the moment, obviously, you could say your line's running for X number of hours a day, but how productive is it in that day? So how many times have you got a 5-minute gap on the feed because the guy hasn't tipped the material into the hopper? These are things that get lost, but through the use of AI, you can actually pull some of that stuff out and get a bit more granular detail. So we're working on trying to get to the stage where we are using AI to sample every area, every round, and get a breakdown of what its typical contamination levels are and what its material composition is, with the view being that in the long run, we've got better control of the in-feed stock, because I think that's the one thing that you then can't. It's then to be able to overlay like the right number of pickers. So if you've got a bad area, you need extra pickers. If you don't, so it's planning that around. We run a double shift pattern. So we've got a double shift in the middle of the day. Well, I want to feed the bad stuff in the middle of the day when I've got 4 pickers, but I also then want the better stuff on the other side. So it's turning it a bit like we do with our approach to logistics of the operation. It's turning the MRF into a production line, essentially exactly like you'd find at like, well, we have Robert's Bakery here or any Vauxhall or any manufacturer. It's applying that technology and that information, and that's what we try and do really. I think the only other one really to add to it would be me. It's this issue of the compliance demands for us. And a lot of people on the call have this same issue around the extra compliance demands from the EA on sampling. They can be really significant, and it's working with on how you can actually do that in a more efficient way than like tipping containers worth of recycling through sampling. Human sampling, it feels like it's a very 19 sort of 70s 80s approach that we're having to do because that's how the EA's got it set up, but that's an area where we are definitely looking from our side. So I think in terms of, I say, challenges for the MRF as a MRF operator, a small scale MRF operator, it's that issue of you don't know what you've got coming in, so you have to figure out how to make the best of what you're getting. Productivity, the right people in the right place at the right time, and then reducing the compliance demands in terms of those costs. So I think they're the main ones I would say, Matthew, from our side.
Yeah, interesting, Jody. So would it be fair to say that you take like a dual approach between looking at educating of the consumer so that we can increase the quality of what's being collected, but then also around driving production within the MRF itself to cope with that?
Yeah, I'd say that's the ultimate aim. It's how you get from it's an unmanageable, like the volumes of material that come in for 170,000 households is massive. How do you get that to a level where you know that 80% is okay? So you're just targeting the 20, then you drill down to the 10 to the 5. The problem you'll tend to find is that's really difficult because the lads just want to tip the stuff off, get out, get back on the rounds again. Actually, it's how you then can get a full picture. Like I know my rounds, I know start times, finish times, speed and average. I know every little piece of data on my collection rounds. But the big commodity that's worth all the money, I have very little information on. It's just a pile of recycling. How can you ever run a productive operation if you haven't got granular level data that allow you to actually then work around that? So I think the AI can help you create a more of a production line mentality. And actually, yeah, if you can feed the materials in at the right way at the right time and with the right staff and the touch, you can maximize that productivity. Because as Jonathan said, staff costs are going up and up and up. I mean, in reality, robotics have a place to play, but in reality, we'll always need people, and actually, we just need to make the best use of those people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lean management techniques, essentially, as you would see within the automotive industry. Sure. I see that you've got your hand up there, Jonathan. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just wanting to echo something Jody had said, really, to be honest. And, the ways that we are using, or one of the use cases that we're looking at for AI analytics at the moment is optimizing our existing facility. So we're looking at what we've referred to as a Six Sigma project, essentially, where we look at using statistical techniques to optimize the plan. But historically, as Jody quite rightly points out, it's difficult to do because you don't have the granularity of data that you need in order to monitor the process, in order to make those improvements. So where AI fits in that project is it allows us to consistently record what's happening to the material stream as it comes out of the ballistic separator, and then determine, right, okay, what impact are the changes that we're making to the process having on the material coming out of the process. Because historically, for the past 10 years or so, while I've been working in the job that I've been doing, essentially it's based upon two things. It's a manual sample that's taken, and then you're asking yourself constantly, well, is this representative of all the material that's come off of the process? Or it's based upon somebody stood there looking down on a conveyor belt and going, yeah, I think that looks better. Yeah, oh, no, I'm not certain, or it might be, or it might not be. Whereas the AI analytics give you some sort of more defined measure, I'd say, as to whether you're actually making an improvement on that process or not, and quantifying it for you as well, of course.
Yeah, interesting. One thing that I think is coming out of both of your points there is the need for multiple different stakeholders to collaborate across the sector. So I guess one thing that I'm really interested to hear around is how can governments, private companies, tech innovators collaborate together in order to overcome some of these difficulties that the industry faces. Jonathan Atwood, have you got any thoughts on that?
So from my point of view, when you look at the majority of stuff that's heading through these systems, it's all falling down to packaging. So that would be the bulk of the material. Now, when you look at some of the packaging, some of it's really useful, really recyclable. Some of it's not so recyclable. Now, the key purpose of packaging, you've got the 3 P's of packaging: to protect, to preserve, and to present the goods. So in some aspects, you have to have unique combination of things. You have to have multi-layer materials. You have to have items that will serve the purpose, but are very difficult to recycle at the end point. So for me, going forward, I'd really like to see much more collaboration between government, private industries, and academia to be able to look for alternatives for some of these long-term solutions. I mean, for instance, food pouches that have PE, PP, and a foil layer in them. Now, those have been made for many years, same as crisp packets. It's because they're fantastic at being moisture barriers, they're fantastic at keeping your product fresh, they look nice, they're bright colours. Who loves to open a crisp packet and see the shiny inside? It's fantastic. But ultimately, what is happening with that material? It's very hard to recycle. Most of it ends up landfill or incineration. Now, surely there must be someone out there who can come up with a better alternative. But at the minute, things are being funded that aren't necessarily of the same impact level. So yes, look at some HDPE packaging. Let's get some more recycled content into a standard HDPE solid item. It's all good work, but still, I think there's better places to be focusing on.
Yeah, certainly it's where the design of the SKU meets the actual real world of going through one of these MFs, right? There's a number of different considerations, and certainly from our end, what we try to do is really try to inform some of these decisions from the packaging manufacturers, because ultimately, as you say, the better the design is for recyclability, the easier it is to process, and therefore the more circular the whole system starts to become. So I think a natural point to go on to here is all around EPR and DRS. So with that on the horizon, do you see these policies shaping how you as an MF operator and the wider industry would act?
So the good thing about EPR is there's going to be a recyclability element brought in at some point. The downside is we're seeing a lot of these things being pushed back, so it's hard to plan for the landscape how it's going to come. So at the minute, everyone's having to put in flexibility into what their plans are going to be. Now, for us, from our point of view, we're bringing in mixed plastics. So we see PET, PP, HDPE. We've invested £4.5 million in a new sorting facility to process between 5 and 8 tonnes an hour. Now, the downside is when we go to DRS, if you look at what DRS is targeting, so that's going to be things like the aluminium, the PET. So it's the items that are going to be single-use packaging that you're only going to have in your house for a short time. So our feedstock's going to change. So we're going to start seeing less PET coming through, less other items coming through. We're going to see a spike in PP, HDPE, which the government says, oh, that's brilliant. You'll get more target material. You'll get more of what you want. But this new sorting facility we've designed and built is designed around standards of materials now. So as soon as you start pulling out these larger fractions of material, you start then having to run the sorting facility slower, so you don't lose material throughout your system, because as good as these sorters are, they can only process a set amount to different streams. So if we then start getting gluts of PP and HDPE through, we'll start losing material into waste fractions. So we'll have to run slower, and then we're not getting the return on investment. So it's very difficult. And as soon as we try to plan something in, the goalposts get moved by the legislation once again. So it's just a very difficult time at the minute. Yeah,
certainly the balance between all of these factors is critical to the issues that the industry faces. Jonathan, I see you've got your hand up again. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, it's just I was going to pick up on something on I guess policy and policy changes coming down the track, and generally something that Jonathan said about making things more circular. And just on that point, obviously, there's the Circular Economy Task Force that's been set up by government within this year that's due to report later this year, that may throw up new policy and new policy essentially into the fray to be considered as well. Overall, that might be a benefit in the long run to the industry, I'd expect, but we don't know what it's going to present yet. We don't know what's going to come from that. So that's something to keep an eye out for, really, from my perspective. And as Jonathan said about EPR and DRS on the horizon, the other one for me that's going to have a really large impact on the way we work as an industry, and it's a bit further away, but it really will affect plastics more than anything else, and that's emissions trading scheme. So the reason emissions trading scheme will have such a large impact on plastics and the plastics sector is it will incentivize recovery, or rather recycling, because we do not want to be sending plastics to energy from waste once ETS is implemented, because you will be essentially penalised for any non-biogenic content burned in energy from waste facilities. So non-biogenic content is essentially fossil-derived material, of which plastics are basically oil. So if you burn plastics in an energy from waste facility, the cost associated with doing that will increase quite dramatically. That's a positive thing for plastic recyclers, because it makes plastics recycling more competitive when compared to incineration, and incentivizes getting those plastics out of MSW so that they don't go for incineration in the first place. Costs, it depends upon what value you put on a carbon credit or an ETS liability. But costs are predicted to, I'm predicting personally, costs to be quite high at the moment, as and when that is rolled out.
Yeah, certainly there's loads coming down the line that can really shape what this industry becomes. And you raise the point of cost there. So with rising staffing and operational costs, alongside increasing demands for material quality, how do you see technologies like AI help maximize the productivity and maintain competitiveness, essentially? Jody, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the big areas we picked was around this issue of productivity for the AI. So I think it's transforming your MRF into, like I said, that sort of a lean manufacturing facility type approach. So and increasing that throughput. So it's getting that fine line between having a full understanding of the material quality that's coming into the plants. So we have a parrot, one of the grey parrots either side of the picking cabin, for example, so I can take the in-feed and I can take the post-picking amount. And it's understanding, finding the perfect point, for example, with the glass breaker, so that you're not running it so fast that the glass breaker isn't effective, because you'll start picking that up through the other side of the plant. So I think AI can really help you get a proper understanding of what the material is, and it'll help you build business cases. So we're looking at, we don't accept film, but we have a very high percentage of film. And interestingly, what we're picking up through the AI is it's very much via volume, so you can get lost in terms of its mass, because actually its mass isn't great because it doesn't weigh anything, but by volume it's really, really high. So what we're able to do with the AI technology is what we're identifying is the pickers are essentially spending their life picking film, and they're not actually picking anything of any value. So once you strip away the film and you work on a pick rate, a pick success, when you take film away, they aren't really removing much apart from film. So if you take the film away and look at percentage of non-target materials excluding film pre and post the picking cabin, it's not changing by much, because they are just inundated by film. So for us, that allows us then to help develop business cases around, actually, should we pick out the film? Because I appreciate at the moment we haven't got endless amounts of outlets for the film, but even at the moment we're just picking it off anyway. So it's helping us build business cases for that one. The other one really is for us in terms of it's a dead time on the line. It adds up. So what we have with the alert systems, the AI alert systems, is it automatically will alert when the belt is empty, and you'll be surprised, even 5-10 minutes, multiple times a day, all adds up. Where actually you've got at the moment you've got the load all shovel drivers loading up an Arctic, and he's left the line empty. I've got two pickers sat there doing nothing for 10 minutes. Now they're not going to complain about that, but essentially that's a loss of productivity. And equally, we've got the knowledge of where's the sweet spot on picking. So you'll tend to find what we'll find. I put three pickers on, and my pick rate doesn't improve because I either have two people using two hands or three people using one hand, because that's generic. That tends to be what happens. So actually, this level of data and insight means you can actually run it like say like a proper production line. And again, so the other thing for AI is around helping you get down to a granular level on where you need to target for material quality. So obviously it is a challenge, but it's in terms of identifying different areas and understanding where their quality of materials come from and what things you can do with that one really. And identify changes in the material streams as well. So as we're starting to see, the AI will help you identify where you've got different areas. So we've got some areas, for example, where we can overlay the demographics of an area, and we'll say, well, typically we would expect a demographic of that type to produce more cans, for example, but yet we're not getting them in, which will allow us to be able to do more targeted campaign work in those areas to generate those materials. And I think the last one for us really in terms of what we're looking at is driving up the value. So we are looking at putting a third parrot into the system, which will allow us to properly analyze the bales. So, for example, our plastic bales, the default position for like cans, if we don't get the eddy separator right, we'll drop them into the plastic stream. So a percentage of aluminium is falling into our plastic stream, and obviously our emery process aren't giving us any credit for that particularly. We want to get to the stage where essentially we can almost stick a sticker on a bale which has its full breakdown by a material type, and then we can start discussing with the end processors then about better returns for us, because I can say, I know 2% of this bale is aluminium, for example. That's better than when I couldn't tell them, because generally the end processors will want the aluminium and they take that as upside. So I think for us as an AI point of view, the main focus is around sort of that material quality, the value of material as well. But that productivity, I think the big buzzword for us is around the productivity. How can I make that plant as productive as possible? Particularly back to what John said at the start about cost of staff. Staff cost goes up, let's make the most of them. If I put three pickers on the line and I get three people using one hand, I'm actually worse off than if I had two pickers on there using two hands. And that's sort of where you get to, unfortunately, unless you put a supervisor watching them do that. So actually, there's some decisions you might make that actually have unintended consequences. So you put the three pickers on, even four pickers, put four pickers on, and if you don't get any better material quality, you're better off with the two pickers. So yeah, they're some of the big points from our side, Matthew.
Yeah, I really like the approach here. Obviously, AI is kind of synonymous with automation of different systems.
Yeah.
But what we see all the time is that these type of systems can go in to really support the workforce that's already in place. So both whether that's the person operating the in-feed systems or whether it's around the manual pickers.
Yeah.
Really, this allows people to be able to do the best job that they can. And
I think we're also, Matthew,
looking
working on, and then the last piece is we're looking at, do you then look at robotics as quality control? So I know a lot of people are looking at robotics for core material picking. Yes, it's got a place to play, but I think actually for us, what we're able to do with the AI now is look at the filtering. So we've got filtered out our small fragments, so the stuff that humans would struggle to pick. And actually what we're finding is a good chunk of that is glass. Obviously we run a glass breaker. Actually, how much, and that's having an impact on where on my baling equipment and all my other stuff, how much would it cost to invest in sort of a fail-safe robotics? It's ultimately just picking out the small glass and all those small fragments and build a business case just on the reduction in cost of the maintenance of the plant. So actually put a robotics there, but give it a very targeted task, which is just these materials here are non-core at this point, pull them out and see how much we can clean up the material. But because we've got that filtering on the AI, I'm working with myself and Gecko at the moment to try and build up a business case for that. Because actually, we know because of the AI exactly what we know exactly at photographic level everything that's going under that onto that exit belt. So yeah, whereas it would have been guesswork before.
No, thanks, Jody. I guess to change the topic slightly, and I'm aware that there's several people in the attendees that aren't working out the UK market. One of the big changes that's happened over here is the increase in requirements to sample both in-feed material and out-feed materials coming from the facility in order to report through to the Environmental Agency. So I wanted to ask Jonathan Atwood, as I know you're very close to this, how are these extra requirements essentially creating challenges? And how do you balance this regulatory oversight and maintaining profitability, essentially?
So it's a very difficult situation to be in, to be fair. So over the past few years that I've been working with this company, we've seen the sampling requirements go up from sampling 1 in 3 loads to every load of material coming in, from going from 30 kilo samples to 60 kilo samples. And now with the MF combined waste return changing in October, we're now having to sort output streams as well. So all this now is increasing demand on physical sorters and counters. So we currently employ 2 people to gather this data, but as of the changes in October, when we're forecasting how many people we need, we're looking at potentially 4 or 6 people. So the staffing cost is then shooting up. You've got the training costs. Each one of these people has a designated station to do their own tasks. So then we're talking about more space, more footprint space taken up. And we also use handheld NIR scanners and benchtop NIR scanners as well, because material isn't always the same. You can get one piece of packaging and you can get an identical piece and it looks the same, but actually on this particular manufacturing run, the suppliers changed material and decided to produce in PP instead of HDPE. So you can't rely on just visual recognition sometimes. So it's a massive cost, a massive increase. So as this burden increases, and I believe over the next few years we're going to see even further increases as well, especially when we go to full-on digital waste tracking. It's going to be crucial to move the majority of this burden to something like AI that can capture this information for you and store it up and have it in reserve, so you can cherry pick the bits that you want, that you have to report on, and you can pick those out, and then save the actual manual labour for the more peculiar tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a topic that I discuss a lot with the UK market at the moment, because the EA is now accepting AI data as a form of automating this sampling. So yeah, it's a really, really big area for us at the moment. And I guess that neatly brings me on to my next question. So I wanted to ask around emerging technologies and where you see in the process new technologies perform a significant role in transforming the industry, I guess. Jonathan Caesar, I guess you'd be the closest to that.
Yeah, from my perspective is I see some facilities that have a bit of catching up to do from my perspective. So I mean, technology and technological solutions are already out there, but it sort of comes back to the point that I was making previously about investment. So the uncertainty that's been around in material recycling for the past 5 to 10 years has stifled investment because people or companies haven't been able to make decisions with confidence. So as a result of that, I see a lot of facilities where I'm like, well, if you wanted to, you could offset a lot of labor costs by installing more optical sorters, for example, which are proven, well-known technologies, but necessarily the investment hasn't necessarily been made because of uncertainty surrounding policy and what's going to happen to the composition and those sort of things instead. In terms of more developing technologies, I mean, you can't really talk about technologies in the waste industry without mentioning artificial intelligence nowadays. So obviously that's a key area of today's discussions in this call. But you know, AI can be used for analytics, like Greyparrot do, but also, you know, it can be used for separation as well. And people tend to bolt on the idea of artificial intelligence and robots. To me, they're two entirely different things. The AI, they tend to, people treat them one and the same a lot of the time and use the wording interchangeably. But AI is essentially the decision maker for an automated picker, if you will. But that doesn't mean that AI can't be used in separation in different ways, similar to an optical sorter, for example, which in many cases may be more appropriate because of if you're trying to analyze large volumes and do large volume separation, that lends itself more to that sort of separation. Something else that I've seen that's a relatively recent innovation, as far as I'm aware, that sort of lends itself to the fires area that we were talking about earlier, is the use of AI in X-ray detectors that could be used on the feeds to plants to essentially be able to detect batteries as they are processed through a processing line. Now, the reason X-ray comes in here is traditional AI can only see the surface of the material, whereas X-ray can see through and pass through the material in order to detect a battery that's set under 200 mil of other material, for example. And then just want to touch on processors is we might see a lot of the technologies used in new and different ways as a result of policy changes. Things that we might see there, I mean, it's more Jonathan Atwood's ball game, but flexible plastic separation, so separating flexible plastics by polymer type and that sort of thing as that material stream starts to come in as a result of simpler recycling changes. Potential that we could see dirty MRFs starting up to try and reduce ETS liability, so emission trading scheme liability, because you want to try and get those plastics out, and there's always going to be a contingent of society that decides not to put their recycling in their recycling bin. You know, there may well be more justification for trying to recover that material in the future. And then the final one really that applies to mechanical treatment technologies is, you know, pre-treatment for other processes that may emerge in the future, such as chemical recycling, for example.
There's some really good points there, Jonathan. Certainly we talk a lot around AI's use within sortation. You definitely correctly point out that AI is being used for analytics, and it's very synonymous with robotics. But the work that we're doing particularly is around how do we start optimizing against this ever-changing compositional mix that comes into the site. Dynamically controlling throughput, dynamically controlling recirculation loops. All of these elements can really increase the overall recovery of the facility by quite significantly. Just conscious of time, because I also want to leave some space for question and answers at the end. So what I'm interested to hear about is all around the adoption of AI waste analytics and kind of the key advantages that you think that people should consider. Jody, you seem to have a lot of thoughts on this area. Would you like to cover that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely how you can plug it into sort of the wider business. I think too often you get like the MRF is seen as the separate to almost like the client. It depends whether if you're a private operator just run a MRF, so it's a little bit different. But if you're a service provider providing the whole thing from collection to sort onto reprocessor, for us it's how you actually link those two things together better. And we've been talking about it this morning about how actually the collection operatives just see it as pick it up, drop it off over here, and then obviously then you have to deal with it all at the back end at the MRF, whereas actually you need to integrate that a little bit better. So it's how you integrate all that together to be a bit more, to be as productive as possible. So even down to the stage of our collection crews will be a habit. They all want to come at the same time. They always want to have lunch at the same time. They all end up queuing for 25 minutes to try and unload if you're not careful. Well, that's no production line would operate like that. So actually we need to get to the stage where we have slots for delivery and those slots for delivery of the materials, because quite often they'll decide they want to come in at 11:30 and then they'll come in at later on in the day. You could shift that around a little bit more. So I think the big one for us is how you can take the whole data piece and plug it all together to make sure it's as efficient as possible. You can make your MRF as efficient as possible, like I say, with the AI technology that's on there, but then how do you integrate that with everything else? So some of your big companies, like I say, SUEZ, Biffa, people like that who run complete services and run it into their MRF, I might be wrong in this, but I'd assume they're almost like two different divisions. I'm sure the MRF runs like a MRF and the collection guys collect the materials, but it's how do you better integrate them? And I think it's something that we can do quite easily because we're small and a bit more agile. So we're not dealing with the volume of material and the volume of services. Yes, we're a decent size operation, but it means that I can actually start joining the dots together. So actually I can start providing feedback loops to the actual collection crews of the materials that came in and where the problems are so they can look out better next week, which means we can drive up material quality, which means we can make the MRF more productive. So I think for us, it's how we get the data source together, and we're working with yourselves. So whilst obviously there's all the portals that Greyparrot offer for the AI, we're taking that and feeding that in via Power BI integration so that we can get all our data in one place. So actually I can have data of what staff were in on what day, which can link to my picking success rate. So I can look for patterns that if I put Dave on the picking line, does the picking line go down in terms of its effectiveness? It's how you take all those big pieces and put them all together. And I think increasingly as you move forward, that's another thing that AI is very good at. It's looking at patterns and trends in data. So I want to try and use AI better to be able to say, right, here's all this data on rounds and tonnage and performance and everything. Just show me what the patterns are. And actually, actually 90% of your problems come from round 4 on a Monday, or every time you put Dave on the picking line, your productivity goes down, or did you know when this happens? It's that they're the sort of patterns and trends that AI can help with beyond just the picking lines. It's just very good at looking at data as data and then just coming at. So I think that there's definitely a lot to be done there, Matthew, in terms of how you set yourself up to be truly data led. A lot of people say they are data led, but actually doing it and putting all your data, and we run it all into SQL databases. So that means that actually you can start to back to this needle in a haystack. How do you find a needle? The easiest bit is to get it to focus on the smallest possible part, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a follow-up question that's actually come through the Q&A before we have the final question of the panel. Connor's asked around how do we bring people along on the journey to trust AI and where they traditionally rely on and trust and what they can physically see. Yeah. Jody, you've spoken a lot around people throughout this panel. How do you go about bringing your team along on the journey of AI adoption?
I think what's really interesting is when you put it in and you look at it recording and showing the materials and capturing them, it feels like a lot of people, I think people find it depends the difference between robotics and AI. People find robotics scary. Robotics are going to come and take over their jobs and they're all worried about it generally. But the idea of AI as in a tool to get data and information out of it, they seem less scared. It's actually quite interesting, I find, and you can get them on the journey. When you start then talking about robotic pickers, that's a different animal, isn't it? Because then you're talking about jobs. But actually, if we're talking about helping them by allowing us to get better quality materials, which means they'll be picking less horrible nappies and stuff out of containers. They're on board with that quite well. One of the challenges we have generally is because on our drive for productivity, I won't apologize for, I asked the staff to work a good day's work in them times. And I know there is a pushback sometimes from the front line around the drive for productivity. Oh, I used to have it easier. It's much harder now. And I'm quite honest in saying, yeah, our role here is to deliver this service as efficiently as possible. But all I'm asking you is to do the hours and the job I want you to do within the hours that I'm paying you to do. And you do get a bit pushback, but overall, generally, they see it as a positive thing because actually as a company, we invest in development internally and stuff. So a lot of the AI technology we're putting in, we haven't brought, and it's not done by outsiders. We upskill and move people through the business. So I think as long as you do it in the right way, I heard something interesting. When I went to, it was NSERC, and they were talking about cobots, not robots. And I thought that was quite good, and that's how they've sold that within their industry. I think that's a powerful message to say, look, this isn't to take your job away, and their job, it was to do with bottles, and it's quite a dangerous front line. They're saying, look, we've just taken these jobs away, and what we've done is taken the people who used to do that, and they are then managed. We've upskilled them up a level. We're trying to do that, so the view will be actually the people, if there is any, not displacement, any people's jobs that need to be upskilled, we'll upskill them from there. So it's a conversation, but I said as long as it's starting in, and Jonathan covered it, it's not robotics, it is AI, and they are not the same thing. But a lot of people do not understand that. They are just scared of the Terminator type world coming in. It's going to take over all their jobs. I think if you sell the message that we're here, it's here to help and give insight. I haven't really had any barriers, to be honest. Most people are quite supportive.
Yeah, certainly it's about opening up and up this idea of a co-pilot. That's something we discuss a lot. So I guess to wrap up the panel section, why don't we ask each of you for one key priority? If there's one thing that we could all leave this webinar with and go out and attack together, what would be the priority for 2025 in the waste and resources sector? Starting with Jonathan Atwood.
So I think we need to see a bigger push on getting the legislation through the door and getting these policies in place. Because there's a lot of good things in there. There's a lot of key building blocks, the things that will reduce contamination, improve quality, and improve recycling rates as well and recovery rates. It's just everything in limbo. It's very, very difficult at the minute for the industry. So once these things are being set in stone, I think everyone will be a lot happier.
Jody?
I think for me, it's going away and approaching it like you can't eat the whole cake. You have to take chunks out of it. So I think it's going away and realizing that AI can help this idea that you can break down this unsolvable huge pile of recycling that's mixed and awful and you don't know what's in it, to actually go in, right, let's not panic about that. Let's just get the data we need, and it'll allow us to focus on the problems. Because you can overwhelm yourself with the size of the task and throw loads of stuff on it and get nowhere, when actually we found, particularly with all the other side of the business, whereby like speed and stuff like that, 90% of the problems come from 10 people, but you spend all your time. And we used to have a habit of you give everyone a bollocking for the miscollection performance, when actually really it was only 2 people, and you end up demotivating people. So I think my takeaway would be that we need to tackle the problem with the MRF and materials around getting the data you need and being able to take chunks out of the pie rather than try and tackle the whole thing.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Well, we've got a few minutes left of the webinar now, so I just wanted to address some of the questions that come through the chat. We're going to go with the most upvoted first, which is there a combination with NIR equipment, or is Greyparrot used as a standalone waste analysis platform? So I guess I'll cover that one. Essentially, NIR is a type of sensor, right? So whether we're recognizing through RGB sensors or NIR sensors, AI will be able to collect that data and then understand it and repeat it in a much faster way. But I think by this question, the term NIR, really what you're asking around is the optical sorting element of where we typically use that phrase. And yes, absolutely. We do a lot of work around powering air jets in a very similar way as optical sorters, as well as combining both the sensors together in order to increase the overall recognition of the system. So anything that ultimately, very much like a robot, we're transferring recognition with coordination and doing that at a very fast speed. Yes, absolutely, AI is set up to do that. Jonathan?
It's worthwhile just mentioning as well, there are some tasks that AI isn't particularly well suited to. where you need near infrared spectrometry. So an example of that is film sorting. So AI can't really tell the difference between a PP and an LDPE film because the visual characteristics aren't there. Sorry, carry on, Matthew.
Yeah, just to be very specific around that, what we're discussing is RGB sensors and its use within computer vision. NIR sensors can also be used in conjunction with AI, and that's exactly what we're doing. So in terms of looking at the more specialist applications, such as film, it's very well set up to do that, but you do need a combination of sensors to achieve that. Within the construction and demolition sector, as an example, if you want to be doing heavy analysis on the mass balance of all the products, you also need to be integrating 3D sensors. So there's a whole raft of different things that we can use depending on the application. And that's really where our focus is at the moment, is broadening that. And this really nicely leads us on to David Ingram's question around the use of AI within other waste streams that the sector deals with. And certainly there is a lot of work going on around the use of AI within we as well as C&D and other streams. But the focus right now is certainly on the DMR market. There's a lot of value that the technology can achieve there. So that's where the focus is at the moment, but certainly in the future, there's lots of other ways that we can go, and we've done various proof of concept projects around that. There's several questions here around film. If I could just kind of sum up what we're asking. Do we think that dealing with film is a matter of building the capacity within the system so that we can handle it? Or should we be encouraging packaging producers to move towards rigid material? Jody?
I think on that, so for us, it depends how you want to. The big issue for us, I can pick the film, whether it's electronically or whether it's human picking. The challenge I've got is when you're asking about, it's then the end market for sending that anywhere. So actually, when we're looking at end market processing for that, it's so limited. So actually, at the moment, I'm just chucking all the film down the big pile at the bottom. I can separate it out, but getting that anywhere that doesn't then ultimately just end up from energy from waste, which it seems to be the challenge. So that's where I stand now. Jonathan probably will know the industry more, but I said, but as a person who's just got a pile of film, I can pick it. I have picked it. I've chucked it in bags. I've picked it, but I can't really do anything of use with it. If that's right, Jonathan.
I entirely agree with Jody in terms of the recyclability of film, but I think we need to look at this as a broader sort of problem as well. More than a problem as well, so to speak, because the reason that film is used by producers is because it's low weight. So because it's low weight, the emissions associated with it are reduced when compared to a rigid. So if you were to talk about or consider the environmental impact of a plastic film when compared to a rigid, I don't know how sort of like the environmental impact would account, so to speak, for a film that isn't recycled versus a rigid that is, because it's not as straightforward as necessarily just saying film's better than rigid or vice versa, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Jonathan Atwood, have you got any thoughts?
So one of the big problems with film is when they multi-layer it. So if you've got straight LDP film or straight PP film, quite easy to handle and recycle. The multi-layers add in difficulties when it comes to the actual reprocessing. But just a quick question for Jody. Could I have some of your film, please?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Welcome to have some of my film. Yes.
Brilliant. I'll send you an email.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Amazing. And this is the reason why I just enjoy working in the sector so much, because we've spoken a lot about the challenges that face the sector, and certainly there's loads, but there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of looking for new innovations. So Jonathan, when you talk about film, is it an obstacle or is it an opportunity? And it's glad to hear that we've managed to connect another waste stream even on this call. So thank you, panelists, firstly. Thank you for everybody who's attended. Certainly, we're really keen to continue these open discussions with the industry, and any questions we've not been able to get to, we'll certainly follow up over email. We'll be sharing the recording to all of the attendees in case you want to watch back in your own free time. And if you've got any further questions, from the panelists and myself, please feel free to reach out. We'll be in touch over email. But thank you again to the panelists and attendees, and we'll speak to you all shortly.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.